You're listening to the Bitcoin Lawyer Podcast.
Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Bitcoin Lawyer Podcast. Bitcoin Lawyer is your legal bridge between Bitcoin and freedom. Today, I am joined by Glen Craig. Glen is an advisor to the Vanuatu government for their official Citizenship by Investment program and has more than 3 decades of experience in this industry. Glen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Adam. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So, Glenn, for those listeners who may not know exactly who you are or what your background is, can you just give the listeners a little bit of personal and professional background about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm based in Port Vila in Vanuatu. I have a
Mhm.
consulting firm called Pacific Advisory. So we're the region's largest corporate advisory firm. So the easiest way to think of us is a little bit like Boston Consulting or McKinsey Consulting, but in a smaller version. And we advise government and private sector, and we advise international NGOs. And we do a little bit with high net worth individuals coming into the region, but basically we're problem solvers. So we look at different issues across the region and see how we can help to resolve them. We do a lot around climate, we do a lot in infrastructure development, public policy, government policy, and a lot around financial systems. So we deal with all the major banks in the region as well. So being based in Port Vila for nearly 24 years, so I have a lot of experience in the region. We're a small firm, and we just specialize in the Pacific. And I spend a lot of time on planes, traveling around in the world, traveling with different delegations, government delegations, just depending on where the assistance is needed. So it's varied and it's interesting. And originally I'm from New Zealand. I was born and bred in New Zealand, and fell in love with the Pacific and been here ever since.
That's a really eclectic background that you come from. As I mentioned, I wanted to discuss today a Vanuatu Citizenship by Investment program. I definitely think that given the shift, if you will, with the cancellation of Malta's Citizenship by Investment program and the Caribbean raising their prices, essentially doubling them in some cases, that Vanuatu is getting a lot more attention just because of the price point that it's at. So I really wanted to kind of discuss that program with you today, and we can discuss some of the merits and particulars of the program, if that's all right.
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to.
Okay, excellent. So maybe you can just kind of walk some of the listeners through how did the program come about? Was there a specific sort of moment that it came about, or was it just something that came about organically? Maybe you can talk about a little of the origins of the program and then what led up to its creation.
Okay, so back in 2012, and we'd recently started the consulting business, and one of our clients was based out of Singapore, fairly high net worth individual, and he said he'd like to become a Vanuatu citizen. He just fell in love with the country, was doing projects there, and he said, "Well, what do you think it would take?" I said, "Well, first of all, we don't allow dual citizenship in Vanuatu under the constitution. You wouldn't allow citizenship." And out of that conversation came the point of, well, okay, well, why don't you put in some time pro bono, he was saying to us, and he'll put in some funds as well for some legislative support. And effectively, what we did is we put together a fairly high level document for the government to say, this is the benefits of citizenship by investment if we introduce it. These are the programs that have worked around the world. These are the programs that haven't worked around the world. These are the reasons why. And here's some basic framework we think should work. And then from there, we presented that to the Vanuatu Financial Services Commission, who were quite open to the idea. We thought that they should be where the program sat, the VFFC. And for us at Pacific Advisory, what we thought is if we introduced the program to the country, because we had a selfish intent ourselves, we were thinking, well, we're going to get investors coming to the country. We're an advisory firm for that type of clientele. If we had 1 in 50 or 1 in 100 of these clients decided to come and invest in the country, we might pick up those clients, and that's great for us. So we definitely had a capitalist view of the program, but it's important to note when we designed it that the government would run everything. There wouldn't actually be agents. And to this day, I still have these regrets where I didn't do the full marketing rollout and framework. I wasn't experienced enough back then to know how that would actually roll out. And we left the government to their own devices on that side of things. We lobbied the government, both the opposition and the government, to the democracy over here, to say these are the benefits. And we drafted the areas of the constitution that needed to be changed to allow dual citizenship. And that was an easy sell for the government because they had a lot of their citizens that have left Vanuatu to go and do higher education overseas in near countries like Australia and New Zealand. And they wanted an opportunity, and they'd picked up permanent residency or full citizenship in their absence. And they couldn't come back home. They didn't want to come back home and give up what they already had. And so it was a natural progression for the government to bring in dual citizenship. So that's the origin. And from there, the country they decided to take it forward and actually gave the citizenship program to a company out of Hong Kong to manage. And over a year and a half, it didn't have much effect, didn't gain much traction. There was probably 30 or 40 applicants. It was priced around $380,000. For a single. And then the real game changer happened around 2000, at the end of 2015, and Vanuatu suffered a catastrophic hurricane. And when that happened, they decided that they really needed to start thinking about additional revenue. We lost 93% of our gross domestic product in 24 hours. It was horrific. It was really bad. And they decided to really boost the program. And so there they brought on multiple agents under what we now know is effectively it's the DSP, Development Support Program. And driven primarily from another firm out of Hong Kong that have been long-standing supporters of the program. They appointed them an agent. And then we had the DSP. And that's how it really kicked off in terms of doing significant numbers, really starting 2016 into 17, and then really started doing some big numbers in 2019, to the point where during COVID, it accounted for around 30, because tourism closed down in Vanuatu with our borders closing, it accounted for in excess of 50% of the government remittances revenue. It was just for that 1 year to 1.5 year period with tourism closed, which tourism normally is 60 to 70% of the government revenue. Or the GDP of the economy, and the citizenship program, that money that the government had set aside from that program over 2018, 19 and 20, the government had segregated that. That effectively is what saved the Vanuatu economy during COVID. And so I'm very proud of that fact, that was something that we were a key contributor to. So that's the background of how the program came about. And of course, I can go into the different programs as we go through the interview.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into the individual programs and the DSP specifically that you mentioned, but I just wanted to hit on one point that you had mentioned. I know from our previous conversations off air, I had mentioned that I went to law school in Malta, and I know from talking to just some of my colleagues, fellow students, the Maltese Citizenship by Investment program is really what helped their local economy as well during COVID. They're a tropical, well, not tropical, but Mediterranean. We'll call it a sunshine climate, if you will, right? So a lot of their economy, they receive a large amount of revenue from tourism. And it was the funds that they had collected from their Citizenship by Investment program over the years where the government actually was able to provide cash payment directly to citizens in the country during COVID, when the country was closed, when people were told to stay home, that sort of thing. So you can definitely see the economic resilience that a citizenship by investment program can bring to a country that perhaps may not have natural resources, such as Malta or Vanuatu, right?
Absolutely. Vanuatu is one of the most at-risk countries to natural disaster in the world. For 6 years, we sat as the number one country on the World Risk Index, which was the UN Risk Index, and we were the number one at-risk country. And that's a whole lot of geographic points that come together to intersect. It's like, what's your governance structure like? How fragmented are your islands? What's the sea levels? Can you respond to a disaster? But at the end of the day, Vanuatu was not a very resilient country because of this fragmentation and isolation from the rest of the world. And these citizenship programs do offer a revenue contribution, especially during these times. When we're looking at around the world where USAID, which were running programs across the Pacific, they stopped their programs and with this current administration in a matter of weeks. And while I'm not going to get into the politics behind it, I can tell you that those programs were doing significant good in the countries. I know that the rhetoric was that, hey, there's a lot of fraud and waste and things like that. Well, in the Pacific, we didn't see it. I don't care what the US commentators were saying. We didn't see it in the Pacific, and those programs were invaluable for the development of our country. And we have to look to other areas now to ensure that we've got a consistent revenue stream. And the Citizenship by Investment program brings that to us.
Yeah, so I think we should definitely dive into the different programs from there. So you had mentioned the DSP, the Development Support Program. Maybe you can talk about the structure of that program, maybe some of the eligibility criteria, and just how the program operates in general.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we have the two programs. We have a partial investment, and we have the development support program, which is straight donation. So they reduced the price on the program back in 2018 to make it more competitive in the marketplace. If effectively for an individual, it's $130,000. Through to a family of four, it's $180,000. Pure donation. There's a $5,000 due diligence fee, which sits across as just a one fee that includes all applicants within it. If you've got any additional dependents, which are you can have children up until the age of 25, and you can have dependent parents above the age of 50. So long as you can show those dependencies, they can be included in there as well. And the fees for that range anywhere between sort of $15,000 and $20,000 to add those people on. It's fairly standard. The program itself shows the Vanuatu government doesn't take a high overview of your net worth. They're of the view that if you can afford to pay $130,000 for a secondary citizenship, that you must be of means. But they do have a criteria to show that you must show $250,000 of minimum assets. This is before you pay your fees, and that can be in anything. Which is why we're very glad about the fact that you can show crypto accounts as a proof of that. You can show property, you can show superannuation funds, your 401ks, you can show any number of things, money just in the bank. So just you show that. They're very big on making sure that that you're healthy, both healthy of mind and healthy of body. They like a reasonable medical from your GP. They're not asking for blood tests and things like that, but they want a proper statement from your doctor to show you're in good physical and mental health. And then this is the big one where all CBI programs have had a bit of an issue at the past in terms of strengthening it. And it's been globally, we know the thing we don't talk about much, the due diligence. And the due diligence has needed to be strengthened on CBI programs globally. And Vanuatu suffered from, I think it was unfairly targeted that it was said to be suffering from weak due diligence. Now, I'd agree with some people and some aspects of that statement. But at the same time, I think the biggest problem is that we didn't defend ourselves accurately. We had poor communications from government and our Citizenship Commission on it. We had the EU, for example, that was saying we have very little people that are that the Citizenship Commission turned down. But what they weren't saying is that the Due Diligence Department of Government, which is the Financial Intelligence Unit, the FIU, they turned down a lot. So once you've got through the due diligence, the Citizenship Commission, so long as you tick the boxes for your assets and you tick the boxes for being in good health, they'll approve you at that point in time. They'll go through and they'll do a secondary check, but they really want to make sure your due diligence is up to scratch. Now, what's happened over the last 12 months is the government's really strengthened it. They've said, not only do we want to be, at global standards, we want to be one of the leaders. So now it's a triple check validation and soon to have independent verification. So the government's about ready to sign a contract for that. I've seen the shortlisted of candidate firms that are going to be doing this, but at the moment, due diligence is done by the FIU. It's done by the independent Interpol unit within government, within our transnational crime unit, the police unit, and it also does an immigration background check from the Ministry of Internal Affairs. So it's a triple check system that is done, and they really want to make sure that you're of good character. And that system before, there were instances where the system was not incorrectly implemented and allowed ability for some people that had poorer backgrounds to slip through. And the government has really strengthened that to make sure that won't occur again. Now, I'll never say never, but the government's really put a lot of effort into it. And when I say unfairly targeted, we saw the issues with, every program's had issues, whether or not it's underselling, or we've seen, Cyprus with their issues. If you're of worth, if you had of means in Cyprus, you could get whatever you wanted. So Vanuatu, because it was a smaller program and didn't have a very good vocal voice, it suffered from that issue. And I could talk a lot about that, but that has been, for all intents and purposes, any gaps that were there have been really closed down. So those are the requirements for the DSP program. Due diligence takes around 3 weeks to go through that. By legislation, they're supposed to do it within 14 days, but we're seeing now as they're really putting more effort into it. It's around 3 weeks due diligence. From there, a full application is lodged to the Citizenship Commission. They sit once or twice a month. So depending on how good your agent is, and you've got a full complete file, then that should come through. And then we always say it's around anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks on the other side of it to get your required documentation, oath of allegiance, have your passport printed, get any other documents, your national identity card if you want one, birth registration, and get those documents out from the commission via your agent. So that's the DSP program. And then we have the Capital Investment Immigration Program, which is partial investment. And this is new. This has only been out for around 14 or 15 months. And the government decided that they wanted additional investment in the primary sector in Vanuatu. And by primary sector, they mean in its industries, mainly agriculture. So what they did is they appointed a number of agents, far less than the DSP, to actually have an approved investment vehicle, an approved fund. And the investment is $50,000, regardless of what the investment is. It could be in coffee, it could be in cacao, it could be in coconut, it could be in kava, which is our national export drink. But whatever industry you decided to invest in, and your agent would facilitate that investment. The government fee came down to, it's just been, I'll talk in the new prices now, it's just risen from 100 to 110,000. So effectively, you pay 110,000 all in for your government fee. You pay 5,000 due diligence, and you make a $50,000 investment that has a redemption period of between 4 or 5 years, depending on who your agent is and what program you go into. Now, it's important to note that those investments are made with the approved investment fund of the agent. They're not made with government. The government's just implemented its new auditing practices. And if you listen, I'm sure your listeners will hear more from you on this, on how they're scrutinizing these investments, but they've made a lot of effort to make sure that the funds are invested appropriately. Most investment, they're not promising a fiscal return. What they're saying is you'll receive your capital back in 4 to 5 years, depending on what fund you go into. And I personally think that that's a good option, because the best thing about it is it's for a family of 4. It's a mum, dad, and the 2 kids, and you can add on additional dependents. A family of 4, 110,000 plus a redeemable 50,000 investment, and that has been incredibly popular, probably accounting for around 70% of client files going through the Citizenship Commission currently since it got implemented. It's gone through an evolution as it's bedded down, but we like it because it's not real estate, and so many programs around the world, whether it's Portugal or Nevis St. Kitts, and I'm not picking on anyone, but what we find is the investment itself is inflated. And so and this is not inflated. You put 50 in, you should, in 5 years' time or 4 years' time, get 50 back and maybe a little bit of a return. So that's the Capital Investment Immigration Program. In terms of documentation, exactly the same as the Development Support Program. It's just a different program, but the same paperwork's required, with the exception is that when you've got your approval in principle from the commission, when you pay your final fees, your agent pays them for you. At that point in time, you'll receive a request to pay your investment vehicle to your investment, and you get a share redemption certificate.
Got it. From a price point, sounds like an amazing value. I did just want to hit on a few things you mentioned. The Caribbean options, and I'm not going to single out any particular country, but we both know that each of those programs has their nuances. But with a lot of those programs, you're paying minimum now 280,000, 250,000 for basically a timeshare, and you don't really get much back on it. So you're paying more than double the price for something that you may or may not use. In some cases, you have to hold the property for up to 7 years just to be able to sell it. And I understand there's not a guarantee on return of capital under this program, but it's a much lower threshold. And for some people, they're still paying more or less the same amount, or actually even less than they would under the donation program, with the likelihood that the capital will be returned. So the investment option actually sounds like a much, much better option. Like once you get above a single applicant, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, I think it is the best option, and I'm biased. I'm in Vanuatu, but I've been around this space, and people like I'm based in Vanuatu, but I travel the world and I look at all the programs. And if you know anything at all about New Zealanders, is we're brutally honest, and I don't buy into the fluff of the industry, and I'm just not like that. But what I as I stand here, you can bring me back on. I'd love to come back on this podcast in 12 months' time. And I think it will be proven that the Vanuatu program will be the most popular program globally for citizenship by investment within 12 months, because the primary reason that people have been favouring it, we've taken a big hit because of the issues with the EU. And the EU have issues with CBI. But what we allowed ourselves to happen because of the poor communication from a small government is we allowed that narrative to permeate through the sector that Vanuatu had a weak program and there was lots of things going on with it, and the EU was singling us out.
Yeah, so as I was saying, I just a few weeks ago came back from an industry conference in Dubai, and that was sort of the rumorings, if you will, behind closed doors, the conversation between the attendees, and the presentations. Each country, there were a few CIUs there, not all countries represented, but of the Caribbean, there were a few. And I had conversations with each of the heads of the, for listeners who don't know, CIU, Citizenship Investment Units. These are the government bodies that actually are in charge of the citizenship by investment programs. I had conversations with each of the heads of the programs, and each of them told me that, this is a concern of theirs, but, when they're on stage presenting, each of them were saying, like, we're not going to lose visa free access to Europe because our program is robust. We're complying with all the financial requirements, which are basically just an extension of US policy through the US Department of Treasury and their correspondent banks, which all the Caribbean countries use because they price the program in dollars. And to turn that around and basically to be able to move that money, they have to use corresponding banks outside of the US. So there's there's definitely kind of this, I would say, optimistic approach, but in reality they kind of know which way the wind is eventually going to blow. And I think this is where Vanuatu is taking responsibility for maybe some of the bad press, which, whether or not you could say it's just or unjust, I would probably also say that as a small country, in an isolated country, to sort of message against a giant global government body like the EU is, I mean, it's like David fighting Goliath, right? I mean, just in terms of size. Now we all know who eventually wins, but at least from a messaging standpoint, it's really difficult.
It is hard, and I could tell you, when I was traveling, and I don't want to name names, but we were picking, when we were meeting, we're going to Brussels and we're meeting with the EU, and then we were having meetings with many of the embassies, all their representatives, the ambassadors, and also we as part of a European tour, we met with the ministers of foreign affairs for different countries, and several of them said to us, "Well, look, we've got no problem with you. If you introduce biometric, will be great." And we said, "Well, where's the issue coming from?" I said, "Well, it's coming from the EU." And I will call out one country. I'll call out France, because they did say that France is a bit of a pusher for this. And if you look historically with Vanuatu, Vanuatu used to be a British and French protectorate. So we had both of them, and we went independent in 1980. I know it sounds a small thing, but France never got over that. And, they've seen there's some uprisings in New Caledonia at the moment, and that's probably going to go, independent. There's independent movement as well. So, when it was announced that we lost our visa waiver, when it was suspended, and the French ambassador was outside of the country for 6 weeks in Vanuatu, wasn't around. And we knew he'd be making a lot of reports back to HQ. They'll probably come out. And I always say this, this is my personal opinion. It's not the government opinion, but this is where I'm coming from, because I know that this will be reported somewhere. But really, at the end of the day, we were the first cab off the rank to be because we don't have a strong voice, and we haven't had that. And it's just one of those things that happened, but it's going to happen to the Caribbean as we stand here. I tell you now, it's going to happen to them, and I think we can see that now how they've announced it. And what I'm concerned more about is if you want a visa for the US, you do have to, 50% of the time, it's 50-50. You have to go and do an in-person interview. They've made it very tough with the new immigration policy. And everyone saw that list from the State Department that the State Department denied was an actual list that had most of the Caribbean countries on it. And anyone who did CBI was pretty much on it. But when we looked at it, we're going, well, how much harder can they make it to get a visa anyway? You have to provide all this information to go in there. But once it's there, my wife is Vanuatu citizen with Vanuatu passport. She gets a 5-year multi-entry visa. And so that's just how she gets it. And it's never an issue. But she does, even as a lawyer herself, she still has to go and do an in-person interview. So I saw lists like that, and that's not really so much of an issue. But I think, we'll see a push where around the world, not just CBI countries, but you can see the way that the US is approaching its immigration processes now. And you can see that the EU is leaning the same way. And so I think there's always been a bit of an attack on the sovereign individual. And you very well, in listening to your podcast from before, you've touched on this a lot. And so I don't think that we're seeing anything different, but Vanuatu has been appalling in its communication. And we've allowed also where I think we had some weaknesses where there wasn't weaknesses per se, but we've had a couple of the larger international, call them either celebrities or call them known people in the industry and large firms that have, despite saying, oh, we don't like the program, have tried to gain the exclusive management of the program. And the moment the Vanuatu government said, no, we wish to maintain that as our own sovereign program and we'll manage it ourselves, rightly or wrongly, those same individuals and companies decided to go out and spent a lot of time bashing the Vanuatu program because they felt like that they were snobbed or turned down and they felt rejected. And I find that behavior appalling. And I think you combine that with the EU, where the country furthest away at the bottom of the world, deciding to be the pick on us first. Few of these larger CBI, RBI countries wanting to gain exclusive access and getting told no, and then starting to put a bit of PR. And we had a program that for the last couple of years has had a less than stellar reputation, which I think 80% of that is undeserved.
I would argue it's probably even higher than 80%. Think that it's really easy to punch down when you're a humongous international governmental body. And for whatever reason, you decide to single out a particular country. Perhaps maybe the level of expectation wasn't there. Perhaps a realistic expectation wasn't there. Now, we can go in and discuss the rights or wrongs of the past, or we can try to improve the program, which is, as you've said, adding an Interpol office in Vanuatu with the introduction of biometric passports as of July 1st. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Biometric passports are introduced now. They're here now, and they're available. And citizenship by investment clients can still receive them, but at the moment they're not making it compulsory to go and give your biometrics. And we think that will come out. That you're going to have to visit your nearest embassy, or the plan is that you'll go to your nearest biometric center like a VRS or TRS, and that's been worked on by the government now. Right, like I have a biometric passport now. I was in Vanuatu, I went and gave my biometrics and it worked really well. It really has gone out of its way to strengthen. And now also in the final, I was in the final negotiations with the EU when we were doing the meetings, and we'd complied with 95% of everything that they asked for, complied with everything that they asked for. And then in the last meeting, they came and they said, okay, that's all great. You've done a good job, but we want you now not to process any Ukrainian or Russian applicants. And at that point in the meeting, that came from left field, and the government was like,
Wait,
well,
Glenn. If I can interject, why were they opposed to Ukrainian applicants?
because they were saying that there's a fluid border and you had a lot of dual citizens of Russia and Ukraine between them. And so they were, that was like, they were, for both applicants, they were like, okay, well, we want you to like pause doing anything with Russia and Ukraine. And we said, well, hang on, you've told us to get off the visa waiver. We need to do this, this, and this. And then you've gone and, as we say, moved the goalposts.
Right.
And I think that's when the government said, well, it's all too hard. And then unfortunately, when you've got we've got a good government now, and we have, for the most part, we have some good bureaucrats. We have, we know that we've all got bureaucrats in our different countries that we don't like or we don't think are competent. But what it did do for the ones that may have been political appointees, you might have a chairman there of this department or an appointed secretary general of this department or whatever. When you constantly get kicked back by the EU or these larger organizations, they're going, well, why do we bother being so strict on things? Why do we bother doing all this? Because no matter what we do, we can't satisfy anyone. We might as well just try and take the money. And unfortunately, that's probably where a bit of weakness came into the system, because they were just processing for volume for the country, for the revenue, and not being as strict as they could have been. And I think a little bit of that came in as well. Now, that doesn't exist anymore, I'll be clear. But I think for a while there, it was just like, well, no matter what we do for anyone, they just come out in the press and we just get bagged all the time. But overall, I'm really happy with where the program sits now. It's just made such great strides in improving its due diligence. We've got a prime minister that's really strengthened the Citizenship Commission. They're running it so strictly. Due diligence has been increased, and they put the prices up slightly to maximize the revenue. And then they're really, really clamping down hard, as we've seen a few jurisdictions have done the same, on the agents and the quality of the agents. We had, at one stage at Christmas time, we had 15 CIIP agents. This is the donation program. Currently, there's only 3. So they reduced them all down, and there's just 3 approved CIIP agents right now that have met the standards required. And that's a great sign. It means that the government is really serious about saying, we've got a good country. We've got a good citizenship program. We want it to be one of the leading ones. And forget about the past. We're really going to make sure that every individual that comes through our program and every person representing the country marketing our program is at the highest caliber. Where possible, they're really trying to make sure that happens. There'll always be exceptions. We know this in any country, but for the greater good, they're making a genuine effort now.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like, there are improvements that the country is making. It sounds like the government of Vanuatu has definitely identified some of those weak areas that they had in the past, but it sounds like with the new government and sort of shoring up those weakest links, if you will, that moving forward, the government and the program itself are moving in the right direction. I did want to hit on maybe some of the nuances of the program. So, someone who gets Vanuatu citizenship, maybe you can talk about, are there any distinctions between, say, like a CBI citizen and a native born citizen? I mean, like with some countries, there are voting rights that aren't extended. Some countries have compulsory military service. I don't think that's the issue in Vanuatu, but, maybe we could just kind of hit on some of those nuances.
Absolutely. There was, when the program first came out, when it was the VS, they had the VSP and the original CIP. They called it honorary citizenship. And so it was just the way that it was registered in the Act. And I think there was a couple of prolific commentators on social media and in the CBI industry that were saying, oh, it's not real and there's weaknesses and things like that. And they needed to improve it's referred to. So it's not honorary citizenship, it's full citizenship. What they did do, though, is they recognized that we have a country of only 320,000 people, of which half of those are above the age of 18. So we have a very small number voting base. So what they said is, if they're doing 2,000 applications a year over 10 years, that's 20,000 people. That's a lot of people, right? To get elected to a member of parliament, 52 members, the average number of voters you need is only, on average across the country, all constituencies, is around about 850 voters to get elected into our parliament. What they were afraid of is that it's the one rule, is that they did not want to skew the electoral system with citizenship by investment applicants. So it's the one thing that a citizen of Vanuatu cannot do that's obtained it by investment, is they cannot vote. Every single other, under the Human Rights Convention, under medical system, education, health, anything else that a citizen is applicable for, that are indigenous or naturalized, like I'm a naturalized citizen,
Yep.
You can do. But the one thing is you cannot vote. And that purely is because they don't want to then, if you can imagine, if you're a group of any one particular demographic, if you came from, if say you had 2,000 applicants from Australia, and all the applicants in Australia decided to put someone forward to run for parliament, and they're all going to run for their applicant, there is a potential that they could skew the makeup of our electoral system. And so they decided for the greater good, because we're a smaller country, to remove that requirement. In terms of other things, there are no issues you can do. You can come and you can set up a business. There's a lot of protected industries for Vanuatu citizens that only Vanuatu citizens can do, not foreign investors. Anyone who's a citizenship by investment citizen can come and do those same protected industries. If you wanted to drive a taxi or do a bus, or you wanted to have a small retail shop, which are all protected for citizens, you can do. But yeah, it's just that one thing you can't vote. Otherwise, you're welcomed. You'll stand in the citizens queue at the airport when you arrive, and it's just as per normal. Same color passport, same document. Yeah, it's all the same. Same consular support around the world.
Yeah, that's actually something that I was going to hit on, because I think that might be not a huge concern, but maybe an afterthought that someone might have after obtaining citizenship by investment. They might think, well, okay, am I offered the same consulate protection in a foreign country if I need it, or not even protection, but just assistance? Like if I lose my passport, like how do I get another one, right? Things like that. But probably I would probably say that and the ability to own property are probably the two biggest questions I'm assuming someone might have.
And it's all a yes to all of them. You can do all of that. The only difference is you cannot vote. Under the Constitution, you cannot vote.
I think that makes sense. And as someone, I don't think that there's really a lot of interest in voting, to be honest, for people who become citizens through this investment program. I think a lot of them are probably politically neutral or apolitical, even in their home countries.
I agree. I think people are wanting to get away from the politics. That's half the reason they're getting the citizenship. So, yeah, like it's nice. It's nice, as a naturalized citizen, I appreciate and welcome I've lived here so long. I appreciate my ability to be able to vote. But that's, I've lived here, breathed here, born up here. This is just how I am. And if gone through the same process of naturalization in another country, great. But I think people that obtain citizenship by investment to start with, they're not getting it to vote. It's a nice thing to be able to do, but let's face it, I would say it would, I would doubt there would be anyone that would have it in their top 10 reasons to get citizenship by investment. And I don't think it detracts from at all from our program.
No, it doesn't. I mean, I've actually just had conversations with people who've relocated recently to Dubai. So you're moving to monarchy and no one has a vote, right? Like, but people are moving there because of the economic reasons, because of the personal freedoms. Even in a religious country, people are finding more personal freedoms in a place like Dubai or Abu Dhabi because of the opportunities that it presents. So I don't necessarily think you have to be political in that sense where you can want to move to a new country or become a citizen in Vanuatu for some of the advantages that the passport offers and not be interested in the politics of the day-to-day running of the country.
Absolutely. I agree. I agree.
You had mentioned a little bit about the economics of the country and how it would played into post-COVID. How is the program affecting Vanuatu's economy, and what are sort of the future projections of the program as it's sort of being fine-tuned?
I think we saw a drop off after the EU visa waiver, rightly or wrongly. We saw a drop of that. I think as the messagings get out that it's not an issue with the program, it's an issue with citizenship by investment.
I completely concur, and I think that's a good place to leave it. Again, Glenn, I just want to say thank you so much for your insight, for kind of, digging into the details of this program, because I think for some people they may be on the fence and they're like, yeah, but what am I getting? What am I buying? But, you really have talked about not just the program overview, but your experience living there on a daily basis and just talking about what it's like setting up a corporation. So I think you've provided a lot of value for the listeners who might be thinking about it and why Vanuatu really is just objectively the best citizenship by investment program on the market now. So just want to say thank you so much for your time. This has been Bitcoin Lawyer. If it's not BTC, you're SOL. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Bitcoin Lawyer Podcast. For more information, please visit our website at www.bitcoinlawyer.com. And remember, Bitcoin Lawyer is your legal bridge between Bitcoin and freedom.